Senator Adam Schiff is warning Americans that January 6 was not the end of the threat to democracy, it was the beginning of a more dangerous phase. What followed, he argues, is quieter, more organized, and far harder to see.
Mr. President, 5 years ago, our nation and democracy experienced one of its darkest days. A violent mob incited by President Trump ransacked the Capitol. Brave police officers were beaten, crushed, bear-sprayed, and maced while defending our democracy with their bare hands. The sacred halls of Congress, including the Senate floor where we are standing today, desecrated. Symbols of hate flown through these sacred halls. And worse, blood and more smeared on the walls and floors. The certification of the election delayed. And later that night, with blood still staining the Capitol grounds, many of the president's allies still voted against certifying the election. I was in the House of Representatives on January 6th. I was in the House of Representatives exactly 5 years ago. I was asked by Speaker Pelosi to be one of the managers of the floor debate that day, one of the managers opposing efforts to decertify the electors. And I remember vividly what that day was like. I remember being surprised looking up from my notes where I was speaking and rebutting what others were saying to see that Speaker Pelosi was no longer presiding in the chamber. She had been removed so quickly I didn't even see her leave the chamber. And then I saw Capitol Police come back onto the floor and grab our number 2, Steny Hoyer, and whisk him off the floor. I noticed only peripherally members were on their phones and not in a way that they were texting, but rather they were watching. And what they were watching, of course, were hundreds and thousands of people outside the Capitol starting to beat their way into this building. And then I could hear them myself outside the chamber, banging on doors, trying to get in. I remember Capitol Police officers coming back on the floor, making sequential and more serious statements about the emergency, that we needed to get out our gas masks. I remember grabbing one under my seat and the difficulty we all had just opening them. And I remember when the Capitol Police came back on the floor and said, "You need to get out, and you need to get out now." I remember waiting as members fled the floor until 2 Republicans came up to me and one said, "You can't let them see you." And the other said, "That's right, I know these people, I can talk to these people, I can talk my way through these people, you're in a whole different category." And at first I was moved by their evident concern for my safety, and then my next thought was, if you hadn't been lying about the election, I wouldn't need to worry about my safety, none of us would. And as I walked off the floor and through the tunnels that day, I remember thinking back to when I had first been elected, and a few months later was 9/11, and how we had gathered on the steps of the Capitol, Democrats and Republicans, to sing "God Bless America." That tragedy had been unifying for the country. And I remember thinking on January 6th, as I walked through those tunnels, that this tragedy would not be unifying. But little could I have imagined that the person who incited that attack on this building, the person who led that first effort to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, little could I have imagined that he would once again be president, and that among his first acts in office would be to pardon hundreds and hundreds of violent attackers who beat the Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police who were defending us that day. Or that we would hear the rampant kind of denials that we just heard from one of my Republican colleagues on this floor. This repugnant, this dangerous, this disgraceful effort to rewrite history, to pretend that this was somehow this misunderstood peaceful gathering of tourists on January 6th. I was proud to serve on the January 6th committee. What really came home to me serving on that committee more than anything else is a large part of what saved us on that day, what saved our democracy on that day, were Republicans of good faith who were willing to do their duty and uphold their oath. The Brad Raffenspergers who said, when the president called and berated him for an hour to find 11,780 votes that did not exist, that he would not do it. Or Rusty Bowers, the Republican speaker in Arizona, who said to Rudy Giuliani when he was urging much the same, "What you're asking me to do is a violation of my oath," and he would not do it. But now we are seeing a systematic effort to weed out anyone who defies the president's false narrative. In hearing after hearing on the Senate Judiciary Committee, candidates for high office and for the federal bench cannot be confirmed if they admit that Joe Biden won the 2020 election and Donald Trump lost. It is a prerequisite to be nominated or confirmed that you must adhere to the big lie. And this is where we are. Most astonishing to me after January 6th is that I would find our democracy in more danger today than I did on that day. The danger has grown along with the denial. The danger has grown along with efforts by this administration to try to succeed next time where it failed in overturning the election, by seating within local elections boards, die-hard partisans who will ignore the law in favor of their favored partisan candidate, pushing out election workers, trying to rewrite election laws, trying to seed doubt in the election system so that if necessary, if they lose the next election, they can try to deny and overturn that too. This is the danger that we face. We thought democracy was inevitable. We were wrong. As it turns out, every generation has its own struggle for democracy. Our parents' and grandparents' generation went off to World War to defend our democracy. What we have to do is, by comparison, so much less. But it is nevertheless so very important. We have the same obligation as those that went before us to preserve this incredible legacy we've been given by our founders. I'm grateful to Senator Padilla for organizing this special order hour for us to remember the horrors of that day and rededicate ourselves to making sure that something like January 6th never happens in this country again. I thank you, and I yield back.
Senator Adam Schiff's remarks go beyond commemorating January 6th. They are a direct warning that American democracy is more vulnerable today than it was 5 years ago. Drawing from his first-hand experience on the House floor during the attack, Schiff vividly recounts the chaos, fear, and violence lawmakers endured as the Capitol was breached. Gas masks were distributed, leaders were rushed out, and members listened as doors were pounded from the outside. This was not political theater, it was a violent attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power. But Schiff's most important argument is not about what happened that day. It's about what came after. He explains that while the physical attack failed, the political strategy behind it did not disappear, it adapted. Instead of mobs storming the Capitol, the threat has shifted to institutions. Election boards are being packed with partisan loyalists. Election workers are being harassed out of their jobs. Laws are being rewritten to create confusion and loopholes in certification processes. The goal is no longer chaos in public view, but control behind the scenes. Schiff also highlights the danger of deliberate denial and historical revisionism. When leaders portray January 6th as peaceful or misunderstood, it isn't ignorance, it's preparation. Normalizing the last attempt makes the next one easier to justify. Disinformation, Schiff argues, is not accidental, it's a strategic tool designed to weaken public resistance to anti-democratic actions. Importantly, Schiff acknowledges that democracy survived in 2020 because individuals, many of them Republicans, refused to break their oath. State officials like Brad Raffensperger and Rusty Bowers resisted intense pressure to overturn legitimate results. But Schiff warns that these kinds of officials are now being systematically pushed out, replaced by people who openly embrace election denial. If those guardrails are removed, the system may not hold next time. The core message is sobering but not hopeless. Democracy is not self-sustaining. It depends on memory, accountability, and public engagement. January 6th was a moment, but the movement that enabled it is still active. Schiff's speech is a call to vigilance, a reminder that defending democracy today means recognizing quieter, procedural threats before they succeed where violence failed.